on. Now this is a scan. What we're going to do to begin with is we're going to load a patient. Okay, this is the main screen that you'll be bringing up patients and doing any number of different functions, from changing comments to bringing up scans. Let's begin by loading a patient. We're going to be looking at a combination of both full spine and cervical scans, some of which were taken on the same day, some of which were taken different days. Okay, now to begin with, okay, let's bring up these scans. Now, one of the functions of this is the history, where you can look at different scans and then choose the ones that you'd like to bring up. Okay, both of these scans in this patient was performed on the same day, and just to give you an idea of what we're looking for, similarity between graphs in similar places that just sticks out to you that the patient's nervous system is not adapting like it should. Now this is the delta T. This is the differential between the right and the left. This third of the screen is the left DT, direct temperature or absolute temperature. This is the right DT. Now what you'd like to see is, beginning at the lower cervical area, a nice gradual ramping up to the upper cervical area. Now in this patient, obviously you see a deviation at this area and this area. And looking at the differential temperature, there's really no question that this patient is not clear. Now, being on the same day, you couldn't conclude that this patient is necessarily in pattern. You would want to look at more scans, but this is to give you an idea. If these scans were taken on different days, whether days or weeks apart, you would without a doubt conclude that this patient is in pattern. Now the next patient that we're going to look at has a similar full spine scan. Now again, these two scans were taken on the same day. However, what we're pointing out here is what we're really looking for in a pattern. What we're going to show you is the most obvious examples of pattern. The borderline cases are the ones where you're really going to have to use your clinical judgment, and you will get better at that with experience of looking at these scans. There's really no cookbook formula saying this is pattern, this isn't. You have to take different variables into consideration. And like I say, if in doubt, don't adjust. Lay them down for 15 minutes, scan them again. If that doesn't work, maybe wait a day, scan them again. You have a couple scans after the first one where you're not sure, you get a lot better idea of whether the patient is in pattern and whether you want to adjust them or not. Okay, this is a full spine scan, and a little bit more difficult to use clinically to say, yeah, I'm going to adjust there or there, but what we're looking for is an overall impression. And as you can see, this is an obvious example of a pattern. Places like here, all through here. Now, depending where you start and stop the graphs will depend on the distance. And so if different scans have been taken at different distances, they're not going to completely line up. Being conscious of where you start and stop on each patient and pre and post is going to help you being able to overlay these. As you notice, there's a slight difference, but this is a very similar scan. If this white scan was brought down a little bit, you can see there'd be even more of an overlay, almost to the point of superimposing. The next scan that we're going to look at is this patient here. Two cervical scans. Now, as before, these scans were taken on the same day. This is a very close approximation of what I was telling you about what you'd like to see with the DTs, the direct temperature, nice gradual ramping up from the lower to the upper cervical area. A slight dip in here, but really it's when you look at this scan that you notice there's some thermal asymmetries going on. And when you look at the differential, there's really no question. You would want to have more scans on this patient before you concluded that they were definitely in pattern. However, if you look at the two scans, you can tell that there is certainly something going on here, and this patient is not clear. Moving on to the next patient, we're going to also look at some more cervical scans. And like I say, there's really no cookbook formula. That's why we're showing you the most obvious examples of pattern, so you can extrapolate to the nitty-gritty later on. One of the things with the C3000 is that it measures direct temperature on the left and both right barrels, which gives you more information than just what you would see with most instruments currently on the market that would only give you the delta T. Looking at the delta T, you can say without a doubt this patient being scanned on 7/21/97 and 4/12/98 is in pattern. Similar points of deviation curves, and if you look at the direct temperature on the left, I can actually move this, the one scan that was initially picked, and you can tell just by doing that, even though the patient's body temperature was indeed a slight difference on the two visits, you can tell that this patient is in pattern. Okay, the last patient that we're going to look at right now is Roger Titone himself. Roger's got scans all the way back to 1991, which we're going to look at in a minute. The first two scans were not taken quite that far back. Okay, now let's look at these two scans. It's quite clear that being one day apart, this patient is presenting with some significant thermal asymmetry. These points returning to the left here, deviating to the right, to the left, to the right, out to the left, back to the right. Very similar on the direct temperatures, or as I would like to call them, absolute temperatures on the left and the right. This patient has a full spine pattern. Now, like I say, you can't necessarily localize and say this is T8 or this is T9, but it will definitely give you an idea that there's thermal asymmetry in the spine, which is indicative entirely of subluxation. Now I'm going to move on to those scans I was talking about just a minute ago from 1991. Okay, you can see here that, it's starting out on the left, moving closer to center. Similar deviations all the way through. This patient is presenting with a pattern that's made even the more likely because of the different days. Now what you'd like to see in a clear, or when someone comes in, is right along this line, maybe going a little bit out to the left, a little bit out to the right, but definitely within these 0.5 degree boundaries. Once you begin to get outside of there, you know that this patient has some nerve interference somewhere in their spine. Like I say here, not a nice ramping, but really just kind of all over. This patient at the time was not under good regular chiropractic care. Well, that concludes a little bit of a walkthrough with some patients. Whoo-wee!